Science is made up of mistakes, but they are mistakes which it is useful to make because they lead little by little to the truth. Jules Verne. Later in this man's life, he came to believe that all you really needed to do to prove the existence of God and creation is simply observe the natural world. It's called deism. Because he saw evidence of God and creation everywhere he looked in his later life. Second most translated author, just behind William Shakespeare. Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists that's ever lived. How far we have fallen from Verne and Feynman to Fauci and Birx. In today's video, I'm going to prove to you that scientists are no longer in charge of science, which can only mean one thing. We are returning to the Dark Ages. That was the hallmark of the Dark Ages. There were no great leaders. There was no inspired thought. Public discussion of anything was not allowed. Many have tried to romanticize this era, but ironically, this era occurred after the fall of the Roman Empire. The Dark Ages, the early Middle Ages, 500 to 1000 AD, a period in European history when learning and civilization declined. Well, that's where we're at right now. Can't question the accepted science, can you? Rome has fallen. No other central authority takes its place, meaning anarchy. Hard subsistence farming life for most. People live in fear of attacks by barbarians and criminals. Believe it or not, there are elements within our society right now that want this. Because they've fallen into this trap of romanticizing things they have no understanding of. This was not a good time for humanity, and we're returning to it. Now, what got me down this road today is something that's probably going to surprise you. I've mentioned this individual before. She's somewhat of a celebrity. Her name is Nicole Arbour. And earlier today, she posted a quick little video snippet on her Instagram. China did it again, and she had found this story about high up in the Tibetan glaciers, they had found these ancient viruses and have begun studying them. Now, I went to the article that she was talking about, and it revealed something that directly ties with what we just spoke of. Scientists are no longer in charge of science, and we can prove it. Now, one of the reasons that I've started following Miss Arbour is years ago, she made the case for being healthy. And here's one of her posts. Same people who get mad at me for saying eat healthy, work out, and try natural medicine before drugs because, quote, I'm not a doctor, cheer for a teen from Sweden giving advice on global warming. Love to hear, and I know who she's talking about, Greta's experience in life that gives her the ability to speak on it. But we'll get back to this in a minute. The proof I'm talking about, and believe it or not, it's tied to Antarctica. It is directly tied to Antarctica because there was another article I was going to base today's video on, and the two literally mate right up perfectly. But first, 15,000-year-old viruses discovered in Tibetan glacier ice. Summary: scientists who study glacier ice have found viruses nearly 15,000 years old in 2 ice samples taken from the Tibetan Plateau in China. Most of those viruses, which survived because they had remained frozen, are unlike any viruses that have been cataloged to date. Let me say that again. Unlike any viruses that have been cataloged to date. Now, what they reveal actually in the article, they bury the lead on this. When they analyzed the ice, they found genetic codes for 33 viruses. 4 of those had already been identified. But 28 of them are novel. About half of them seem to have survived at the time they were frozen, not in spite of the ice, but because of it. Quote, these viruses that would have thrived in extreme environments, said Matthew Sullivan, co-author of the study. Viruses have signatures of genes that help them infect cells in cold environments. Just surreal genetic signatures for how a virus is able to survive in extreme conditions. These are not easy signatures to pull out. Viruses do not share a common universal gene, so naming a new virus and attempting to figure out where it fits in the landscape of known viruses involves multiple steps. Now, here's the part that's crazy about this. We know very little about viruses and microbes in these extreme environments and what is actually there. Now, how does that jive with what we've heard come out of the government and their official stories over the last year about viruses? They know everything there is to know about their transmission and about where they came from. See, people talk about the bat theory and some people talk about the lab theory. What about the melting ice theory? Anybody think about that? So these viruses survived in extreme cold, and some of them actually thrived because of the extreme cold. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, what does this have to do with Antarctica, Maki? What does this have to do with anything? We understand that, science is now being controlled by politicians and people that have no desire to take a risk or have any original thought. They just want to control people. We get that, Maki. What does it have to do with Antarctica? Now, missing Antarctic microbes raise thorny question about the search for aliens. Now you think, wait, what? Antarctica, aliens, what does that have to do with one another? Well, long story short, there were 200 soil samples taken in a specific region in Antarctica, and when they brought them back, they found a complete absence of life. In all 204 samples, they found absolutely no evidence of even microbial life. Now, what do we know about Earth? Earth has life, right? So if you just take samples from a certain place, you can't make large sweeping proclamations about what is or is not true about the place as a whole. Imagine a listen to me, extraterrestrial life form. Let's just pretend that exists. And they come to the planet and they land at this section in Antarctica and they take samples and they go back to their planet and they find no life. They'd be like, well, okay, no life on Earth because of that tiny, tiny little sample. And by tiny sample, 204 samples. But what they really talk about here is absence of evidence or evidence of absence, about proving a negative. And the reality is this: they apply one standard to quote-unquote life in the universe, meaning if they go to Mars and they find anything that kind of remotely looks like it might be evidence of life, they're going to extrapolate some lost ancient advanced civilization having been on the planet in some giant biome, and they're going to blow it out of proportion. But in Antarctica, even though everything is there slapping them in the face, they still stick by their fake story of there can't possibly have ever been any advanced life forms in Antarctica. There's no evidence of blah, blah, blah. See, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And this guy actually says it. Evidence of absence is not absence of evidence. As scientists search for evidence of life beyond Earth, they will inevitably be forced to walk the line between, like I said, evidence of absence and absence of evidence. What we're trying to do on Mars is kind of the reverse of what we try to do on Earth. What does that tell you? He literally says it. We're applying two different standards. What we're trying to do on Mars is kind of the reverse of what we've tried to do on Earth. On Earth, claiming that an environment is lifeless is a tough scientific sell. But on Mars, it's the other way around, meaning that it's virtually the quote-unquote accepted science. Which then brings us back to here. Science is the belief in the ignorance of the experts. Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman, one of the greatest scientists and physicists that ever lived. Some have compared him to Albert Einstein. Belief in the ignorance of experts. Now, one final thought. Many of you have said, Maki, you just like pretty girls. Maki, you just like to see girls in bathing suits and all this kind of stuff. And that's why you talk about Nicole Arbour and no one else. Well, I do talk about other people, but something else Feynman said. Physics is like sex. Sure, it may give some practical results, babies, but that's not why we do it. I think this sums it up perfectly. And this is the truth of why we are heading back into the Dark Ages. Back when beauty was reviled and only base subsistence was allowed. No questioning, no imagining, nothing like this. I believe there's a quote from, I'm trying to remember the guy, Tesla, Nikola Tesla. And he said something to the effect of, you can be a deep thinker and have no common sense and be totally insane. See, deep thought is not evidence of intelligence or rationality. And that's what we have right now in science. We have no one even observing the natural world, looking around and using common sense. And that's what ties in Jules Verne. Because he said that's all you need to do. Science is not the proof that there isn't God. It's just the evidence of how God did it. And our limited ability to interpret it. But make no mistake. Make no mistake. Fall of the empire, the American Empire, the Roman Empire, we're heading into the Dark Ages 2.0. And I'll leave it there. God bless. Like, share, subscribe, and check out Nicole Arbour. Not only is she pretty and funny, but she's also smart. And I'll leave it there. God bless. We'll see you guys tonight on Twitch.